like to welcome everybody to Professional Insight. I'm your host, Chuck McClatchy, and this is brought to you by the Dementia Action Alliance, and our website is daanow.org. My guest today is Aaron Ritter. Dr. Ritter is an associate staff in a neuropsychiatric and behavior neurology, as well as the director of clinical trials at the Cleveland Clinic Lou Ruvo Center for Brain Health. Dr. Ritter treats adult neurological patients and also leads the clinical research department by conducting urgently needed trials to advance the prevention, early detection, and treatment of Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, and Huntington's disease. With more than 50 drug and diagnostic trials being conducted at the center, the Lou Ruvo Center for Brain Health is one of the largest and most active clinical research facilities for memory disorders in the country. Dr. Ritter, thank you so much for joining us today. Why don't you tell us some things about yourself?
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about these important issues. So I got interested in brain health and neurologic diseases during medical school, as the brain is kind of the final frontier, and in terms of we're just scratching the surface about understanding how it works and how it changes in disease. And I pursued that through my residency, which was in psychiatric care, and merged that with my interest in neurology and my fellowship. So I've done training in both neurology and psychiatry with a focus on dementia. And my particular interest currently in my career is finding more effective disease-modifying therapies that could slow down or even halt the progression of these common neurologic illnesses. So I spend about 2/3 of my time caring for patients with dementia, which includes diagnosing and treating with the medicines we have available, and about 1/3 of my time doing research, both studies that help a person understand how the brain changes with Alzheimer's disease, as well as testing new medicines that may be more effective for Alzheimer's disease.
Well, that's a lot of clinical trials. And I know that one of the hard things about clinical trials is getting people to participate. I'm an active participant. I've been in one clinical trial for 2.5 years, and then I'm in a clinical study with you now. But why, I think a lot of people want to know, why are the parameters for clinical trials so strict?
Yeah, well, that's a challenge in the field. Every study has a inclusion and exclusion. These are essentially a checklist of things that a patient has to have and things that they can't have to be in a study. And part of the problem we have when it comes to Alzheimer's disease and any neurologic diseases is the syndromes that come with the disease can be very different based on a person's brain. And to try to control for that, so limiting the variability of including people with various symptoms, we develop these inclusion and exclusion criteria. And oftentimes that limits the ability of people to participate in clinical trials. It's also done for safety reasons. So if a person has had a stroke or has a heart condition or has kidney problems and we're testing new medicines, we don't want to subject anybody to a higher risk of having side effects. So those inclusion and exclusion criteria are built to try to make sure we're studying similar people and also to ensure safety. One of the big problems with Alzheimer's disease is the symptoms that come with it are very variable. We have people that have only memory problems. There are people that have only speech problems. There are people that have only behavioral problems, or have a combination of all three of these things. And in a clinical trial that may be determining to check memory, to test to see if a medicine helps memory, we want to make sure that a person's memory may be affected to be able to show a benefit. So we do try to shoehorn a very complicated disease with many symptoms into being very mainline or streamlined during the clinical trial process. So that does end up excluding a percentage of people, which is just unfortunate.
Now, one kind of addition to that, I was wondering, um, uh, if you were denied a clinical trial, can you reapply at a later time if the clinical trial is still recruiting?
Yes, so that's usually built into the protocol is that you can rescreen. Typically, it could be anywhere from a month to 3 months out. That's for inclusion, typically for inclusion. So, for example, in inclusion means you have to score a certain score on a test. If the test is out of 30, you have to be between, for example, 18 and 22. Your score has to be between that. That's an inclusion criteria. And so if you score, let's say, have a really good day or have a really bad day and your score is 24 or 17, then the sponsors will generally say, well, you can try it again and see if you get within that range. But if it's an exclusion criteria, for example, you've had a stroke or you have heart attack recently or have cancer, generally you're not allowed to rescreen. So it sort of depends on what is the thing holding a person out of the study. And if that changes, if that's reasonable to change over 3 months, then we can redo it.
Okay. I guess another, big item that people are worried about is, can you explain why most trials require some type of a care partner to come with you?
Yeah, so this is also another challenge or shortfall in Alzheimer's disease studies is that oftentimes uh, a person that has a disease may not be aware of the full impact of the symptoms. So if you have a memory problem, sometimes you can't remember how bad the memory problem is. So oftentimes somebody that knows you best can say, well, maybe the memory is a little bit worse or a little bit better than what the individual is reporting. So that's important. The other reason is a lot of the tools that track success are based on how well a person is functioning. And generally that's best observed by a well-known family member or a caregiver. It can answer questions about how well does this person seem to be managing money? How well do they seem to be keeping appointments? How well are they at keeping a schedule? And those things aren't always internally apparent. So the challenge is that whenever we enroll somebody into an Alzheimer's study, we're actually not enrolling one person. So if the study calls for 10 people, we're actually enrolling 20. So it does make that a bit of a challenge. Hopefully we get to the point where we can use less subjective measures, and the measures we use are generally subjective, meaning we're asking people their opinions, and we can move to more objective measures. So we can look at brain scans and show this medicine changed the brain scan or changed this lab value in a certain way, and that means something. Right now, we don't have any prognostic markers that are objective. So, for example, we don't get brain scans generally every year in our patients because they don't change very much. And we don't often repeat labs very often because the labs don't change very much. So if we get to a point where we understand how the labs are changing and it's really more of an objective measure, we would be able to eliminate having the requirement for a caregiver, because it does also eliminate some people from being in studies if they don't have anybody to participate. But that's just the paradigm that we operate within. That's the set of circumstances that all these clinical trials operate in, and it's mandated by the FDA. So when we do studies, people say, why do a research study where there's no medicine? Well, research studies are helping us answer these other questions to say, well, maybe there is this lab test that we haven't discovered yet that measures where a person is with their Alzheimer's disease. And maybe that lab test will be able to allow us to apply it in a clinical trial then where we don't need to rely on the subjective family member. So it's a long answer to a short question, but right now we need care partners to provide answers about functioning.
Okay, another one of the questions is, when the drug trial ends or a person doesn't want to be in any longer, what happens?
When a drug trial ends, well, let me answer part B. If a person doesn't want to be in a study anymore, that's an easy one because then they don't have to be in the study anymore. There's no contract to participate. We sign a consent. We have people sign a consent to say they understand the study, but it's always the prerogative or the will of the patient. If they're not able to come for visits, or they can't do a certain thing, or things have changed, or they're having side effects, it's always the will of the patient whether or not that they would like to continue on the study. Now, if you drop out and then you want to come back, that's a different story. But the fact is that the patient always has the right, or participant always has the right to discontinue at any time. Now, what happens when a drug study ends is a different question. It kind of depends on what the outcome is. Most studies in the past 20 years have failed. They have not been successful. So what we found is that we end the study and we continue monitoring for a short, brief period after the time that the medication is given, usually 3 to 6 months. And at that time, we collect out additional safety data, making sure that there's no long-term effects. And then it really depends. Oftentimes, there's what's called an open label extension, where a patient may continue on if they finish the placebo part, and there's still hope that the drug is working. We switch everybody over so that everybody knows they're now getting the medicine. Or the drug failed, and then the study is over, and then people are free to go on to a different study. You have to be inclusion and exclusion in a different study. And there's usually a waiting period to make sure that the previous investigational medicine is out of a person's system, and then they're usually open and able to participate in other studies. At our brain center, a lot of our patients continue to do different studies, so they've helped us in many different ways. It's just usually kind of a waiting, cooling off period between studies.
Yeah, because I was in one for about 2.5 years.
Right.
We actually got to the open label, and after the 18 months, they actually told me that I had been on the medication the entire time. And then we continued it on for, I think it was almost another year. But then it came, I guess there's a big document or something that has to go in at a certain time to see if you're actually meeting the standards that the FDA says. And when that first one went in, they didn't meet the standards. Yeah. So I got a call on I think 5 o'clock on a Friday night that it was over.
Yeah, it can be pretty devastating. It can be pretty shocking. And that's been the history, though. But we learn from our failed trials. Even if a trial isn't so successful, we learn from them, because there's a lot of information that's collected. And maybe that's not the right dose, or we need to do different doses. But every single trial that we do, I think we learn from. But it's shocking, because we think that the ones that we're doing, they wouldn't have gotten to the point where we could test them if they hadn't had a track record of success. It's like a Major League Baseball player getting called up to the majors. Everybody that's ever been in the majors was successful in the minor leagues, and that's exactly how our drug trials are. It's just when we get to subject the medicines to the rigors of a very large clinical trial, some things that we don't expect happen. They're not as successful as we would have hoped.
The next one I got: what type of care is provided during drug trials?
That's a really good question, and it's an important question. And I would say that the level of care that's provided during a clinical trial actually exceeds that of what you get in clinical care. You're monitored very closely, so we do lots of EKGs, we do lots of brain scans, and although those sound intrusive, they are for safety monitoring. So a person, in terms of safety, we do a lot of different lab work, so we often detect things that people may not know about themselves when we're in the course of a clinical trial. You have a study doctor who is in charge of the study conduct. You have a research coordinator who helps coordinate all the visits and make sure everyone gets into the visits appropriately. So I think the level of care that a person receives in a clinical trial is rather high. So I'm in favor of the model. The model is different than what most people expect in terms of you're coming in and getting tested and getting shots and all these different things. When in fact it's not much different than actually just having more frequent visits with having a very personalized care plan. So I do think the clinical care a person gets in a clinical trial actually exceeds that what they get normally.
I have to agree. With mine, I went in every 3 months, and in the 18 months I was on there, they had I think 3 brain scans, one at the beginning, one at the middle, one at the end, and then 2 MRIs. And we had a number to call if there was 24 hours. That the first thing they said was, if you feel sick or something, go to the emergency room, call us. And it was a physician that was kind of in charge of the trial. And I got every 90 days, I got basically a small physical,
Right.
with all the blood work and everything else. So I felt it was phenomenal care that I got, during the drug trial.
Absolutely. I'm glad that was your experiences because that's what it's supposed to be like.
Where can people obtain information on current and future drug trials?
The best source of information on drug trials, and it's rather frustrating because not every clinical trial has a website, but all clinical trials are mandated to report to a website called www.clinicaltrials.gov, and all new studies and studies that are testing medicines are on that website. It's mandated by Congress, so studies are required to be reported on that website, clinicaltrials.gov. If you Google search it, clinicaltrials.gov, they have several search features. So you can search by your location, you can search by the disease, you can search by the medicine, and that provides all the information about the trial, and there's also contact information. So it's a nice repository for searching for different indications, locations, and rare diseases as well. So clinicaltrials.gov.
The last question I have is, if somebody views this and they're thinking about clinical trials, what would you like to say to them?
Well, I think I'd start with the fact that every 65 seconds in the United States, a person is diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease is a disease that affects 5 million Americans and 20 million people worldwide. And because people are living longer and healthier lives, and poverty rates around the globe are declining, we're going to see a dramatic increase in the number of people being diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. We think that by the year 2050, the numbers will quadruple. So by that time in 2050, which is not that long away, we'll see about anywhere from 50 million people in the United States and 200 million people worldwide. It's a common disease that affects everyone. Age, not genetics, is the biggest risk factor. So anybody over the age of 65 is at risk for Alzheimer's disease, even if you have no family history. And we don't know why that is. It's a multifactorial disease that is often caused by genetics, but in many cases it's not. So genetics only play a small role. I know a lot of people think that if they didn't have any family member affected, that then they're not at risk. That's not the case. It's really an age-related disease, and it's a devastating disease for a lot of people, and it's a disease that I think represents a urgent public health issue because we don't have effective treatments, but we've learned a lot in the past 20 years. We sort of learn about the biology and what we think is the proteins that are causing the disease. And we've gotten a lot better at how we run our clinical trials, and we've gotten a lot more sophisticated in terms of the medicines that we think may help. And we know there are about 120 different medicines that may that have shown promise in the minor leagues in phase 1 testing that have been brought to phase 2 and phase 3 tests. So there are 120 different medicines that are out there that we need to test. And we know that about 50% of studies fail, not just because of the medicine doesn't work, but because we just can't enroll enough people. And we know that to test all the medicines that are in the clinical trial pipeline, 120 different medicines, that we need about 50,000 participants. So this is an urgent need for us to get people involved in clinical trials and to test new medicines and to contribute to the mission of solving this disease. And so the best way a person can do is both through awareness, donation to Alzheimer's associations and other associations that support Alzheimer's disease. But the biggest contribution, I think, is participating in a clinical trial. We want to identify people as early as possible in the disease spectrum. We think this is a decades-long disease that stretches out for 30 or 40 years during the course of a person's life. So we know that the proteins that are causing the disease are likely building up decades before the onset of symptoms. And if we attack the disease when the symptoms are the most mild, that would have the biggest benefit. So early detection, early awareness, and participation in clinical trials, I think, is so crucial and so important. So if you have the opportunity to learn more, or if you have any inclination that you want to contribute to the cause, I would go to the clinicaltrials.gov website. If you live in the Las Vegas website, go to our website, healthybrains.org, and learn more about clinical trials in Alzheimer's disease. Go to the Alzheimer's Association, go to one of the walks the Alzheimer's Association puts on, and just learn more, share more, and get involved, because it really is a problem, I think, like climate change and like issues that affect all individuals. I think Alzheimer's is one of those, and it's not really talked about. So it's something that I think is really important. So I really appreciate having podcasts like this where I can be able to share our information. I appreciate the microphone to be able to kind of share this, but it really gets down to having people participate in solving this problem that's shared through humanity. So I'd encourage people to do the things I just mentioned.
That's awesome. Well, Dr. Ritter, I want to thank you so much for taking time and answering our questions and giving us so much insight on clinical trials and how to get involved in them. And more important, I think, is the importance of them. So I want to thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And anytime you need anybody to talk about this, I'd be happy to come on again. Thank you so much.
Oh, that's great. We'll probably have you back again then.
All right, great.
Everybody else, I would like to thank everybody for watching our podcast today of Professional Insight. If you like our podcast, you can view more on our website, daanow.org/podcast. So thank you very much, and everybody have a great night.
Connecting our lives to help us survive, so we live our time to the fullest we can.